Good morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. My name is William Gardner, and I am the Chief Administrative Officer of Nevada OSHA. I have with me for the Division of Industrial Relations, Victoria Carrion, Division Administrator, Christopher Eccles, Senior Division Counsel, and Justin Tarouk, Division Counsel. For Nevada OSHA, I also have Michael Rodriguez, Program Coordinator, acting as moderator, and Jimmy Andrews, Program Coordinator. It is 10 o'clock. That's the time and place set for the public hearing for the Notice of Intent to Act on Proposed Regulation, LCB, file number R053-20. Notice by the Division of Industrial Relations to amend NAC Chapter 618. This hearing is being held via WebEx and is also available by telephone as allowed by Senate Bill 253 of the 2021 session and Nevada's open meeting law. Our purpose here today is to hear your comments and suggestions on the draft of the regulation that has been noticed for adoption. Nevada OSHA and the division heard your concerns and comments on the previous drafts of this regulation and believe this draft addresses those concerns. A copy of the document has been posted on both the State of Nevada's public meeting website and the Division of Industrial Relations website. To facilitate the discussion and ensure clear recording when you testify and each time you testify, please make sure you state your name and spell your name and identify the agency or employer you represent. Members of the public who are not providing comment on the specific regulations or are not parties to the hearing will be muted by the moderator. Opportunities for public comment will be available as described in the meeting agenda. If you are participating in this meeting using WebEx, the WebEx application on your computer, please use the raise hand function to indicate your desire to comment. The raise hand function is found in the participant sidebar next to your name. If you are participating via telephone, press *3 to notify the moderator of your desire to comment. Upon instruction, the moderator will unmute you and indicate your ability to comment. Telephone participants will receive an automated prompt from the system that your line is unmuted. R053-20, or the Nevada OSHA's heat illness regulation, contains requirements related to the creation and implementation of a heat illness program at a dry bulb temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Additionally, this regulation creates training requirements associated with the implementation of the heat illness program. This regulation is the culmination of multiple stakeholder meetings, public comment, and revision cycles with industry and employee groups to ensure that this regulation is both reasonable and effective. It's also important to note that federal OSHA is working on its own heat illness standard. Once a federal standard is adopted, Nevada OSHA will have to evaluate this regulation and ensure it's at least as effective. If Nevada OSHA can demonstrate that this regulation is at least as effective as a more prescriptive federal standard, then Nevada OSHA will not have to make changes to this performance-based regulation that was built by Nevadans. Item 2 on the agenda is public comment. The opportunity for public comment is reserved for any matter listed below on the agenda, as well as any matter within the jurisdiction of the division. No action on such an item may be taken by the division unless and until that matter has been noticed as an action item. Comment may not be restricted based on viewpoint. Is there any public comment at this time? Please note that if you have a comment on a specific portion of the proposed regulation, we will entertain comments on each section as we go through the regulation. Hearing no public comment, we will move on to the agenda item number 3, which is discussion of proposed permanent regulation LCB file number R053-20, amendment of regulations that pertain to Chapter 618 of the Nevada Administrative Code. To facilitate discussion on LCB file number R053-20, we will be taking comments section by section of this regulation. Is there any public comment on section 1?
Mr. Chair, I'm seeing no hands raised and nothing in the chats.
Is there any public comment on section number 2?
Mr. Chair, no hands raised, nothing in the chat.
Is there any public comment on section number 3?
Mr. Chair, no hands raised, nothing in the chat.
Is there any public comment on section number 4?
Mr. Chair, no hands raised, nothing in the chat.
Is there any public comment on section number 5?
Mr. Chair, no hands raised, nothing in the chat.
Is there any public comment on section 6?
Mr. Chair, no hands raised, nothing in the chat.
Is there any comment on section 7?
Mr. Chair, I got a hand raised here. Mr. Jesse Wadhams, you are now able to unmute your mic.
Thank you, Chair Gardner. I appreciate the opportunity. I guess this section probably is the best one for me to put my comment as the implementation component of the regulation. One of representing the Vegas Chamber today, the conversations that we've been having on this program and the implementation thereof have been insightful and helpful. However, the chamber continues to have concerns about the broadness of the heat illness program and the impact it could have on both indoor and outdoor working conditions. There's concerns about the underlying temperature threshold of 90 degrees with no humidity factor. And I think last but not least, the idea that we are now moving ahead of the federal OSHA and may have to revise and or change. It seems more prudent to put this policy consideration at the legislature. Appreciate you sort of taking this comment as sort of general to the implementation program, which is in section 7. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wadhams. Can you just state your name and spell it for the record, and then your title?
Mr. Wadhams, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I still was. Jesse Wadhams. It's JESSEWADHAMS with the law firm of Black and Wadhams, representing the Vegas Chamber.
Thank you, Mr. Wadhams.
Mr. Chair, we got another hand raised here by Peter Kruger. Mr. Kruger, you may unmute your mic.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Peter Kruger, representing Northern Nevada NECA, National Association of Electrical Contractors. And I wanted to, and this seems like, I guess, about the only place to refer to my comments. As far as I can find nothing in these regulations that talk about enforcement and penalties. Is there an overall OSHA penalty provision that would apply here, or what penalties could be assessed, and what enforcement action will be taken?
Thank you, Mr. Kruger, and I can go ahead and comment on that. That this regulation will be we will be able to post citations as any other regulation we currently enforce. So just to put that out there, that our current regulation practice, we can't post citations on any of the regulations that we have, and we follow our Nevada Operations Manual to determine penalties and severities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kruger. Mr. Kruger, also, I'm sorry, can you also just spell your last name for the record?
Sure. It's Peter Kruger, P-E-T-E-R, Kruger, K-R-U-E-G-E-R, with I3 Public Relations, today representing the Northern Nevada National Association of Electrical Contractors.
Sir, appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, I got another hand raised here. Mr. Robert Ostrovsky, you may unmute your mic.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to speak. This is Robert Ostrowski, O-S-T-R-O-V-S-K-Y, representing the Nevada Resort Association. I agree with the comments that were made, but I had a question about it's in sub 1 of section 7. It talks about the employees are exposed. Is there a definition I can turn to somewhere for my clients? Does that include incidental exposure? How long do they have to be exposed? Is there some other definition of what exposure means? It's quite frequently, obviously, in the temperatures in Las Vegas, that people may walk outside or through an area where, in a kitchen, for example, but have incidental exposure. They don't actually work in those areas. Would they still be covered by this regulation? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ostrowski. Yeah, well, I'll cover that at the end here. I appreciate your comment.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, seeing no other hands raised and nothing in the chat.
Is there any public comment on section 8?
Mr. Chair, we got a hand raised here. I don't know if it was for the previous section, but call in user 3. You may unmute your mic.
Hi there, sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, this was a public comment for section 7 as well. My name is Alexandria Gazlich, D-A-Z-L-I-C-H. I'm here representing the Nevada Restaurant Association. I want to echo the comments made by my colleagues, as well as wanting to emphasize how difficult it would be to consistently comply with these arbitrary standards designed for outdoor work. So also just wanted to include that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Kruger, you may unmute your mic.
Thank you again for a second time, Mr. Chairman. Peter Kruger, Northern Nevada, NECA. Had a question on the provision, and I'm not sure where this fits, but it requires employers to make an assessment of a number of factors, including age, physical conditioning, those kinds of things. Our members are really concerned about that and how it applies to HIPAA, and employers traditionally or legally are not able to ask many of those questions. I wonder how you see that provision of determining an employee's fitness in a high heat situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kruger.
Mr. Chair, seeing no other hands and nothing in the chat.
Is there any public comment on section 9?
Hey, Mr. Gardner, this is Christopher Eccles. Did we go over section 8, comments on section 8?
We did. Some folks chimed in with section 7 comments, but we went over section 8.
Just making sure. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, seeing no hands raised and nothing in the chat.
Okay. Item 4 on the agenda is public comment. The opportunity for public comment is reserved for any matter within the jurisdiction of the division. No action on such an item may be taken by the division unless and until the matter has been noticed as an action item. Comment may not be restricted based on viewpoint. Is there any public comment at this time?
Mr. Gardner, I have one more issue to raise, if that's all right with you. This is Christopher Eccles again.
Yeah, Chris.
I think that there was a comment by Mr. Ostrovsky on behalf of Nevada Resorts Association, and he had raised an issue of what about incidental exposure? And I think you may have said that you were going to say something about that. I'm not sure if you got that in the record. I think it was part of the FAQs that were put out by Nevada OSHA. But if you want to put your comment about incidental exposure on the record for this one, I think now would be the time to do it.
Thank you, Chris. So yeah, I'll cover that briefly. So as far as exposure is concerned, the design of this regulation is that the employers essentially are assessing their workplaces. So as far as an incidental exposure, I'm assuming that's related to someone going outside and it's 115, but it's not their normal job duties. Nevada OSHA would take that into consideration. And part of reviewing the program is the employer identifying who is typically exposed to those working conditions. So if someone's outside and they're, in 115-degree weather for 5-10 minutes to pick up a package or something, we wouldn't consider that the exposure that you're probably thinking as far as something citable or enforceable. What we wanted is the employer to evaluate what work activities are actually exposed to these temperatures throughout their work shift. And based on that, Nevada OSHA would review the program and review how it's actually being implemented. And based on that, potential enforcement activity would take place. But we would not be looking at the ancillary incidental situations as a matter of exposure, if that makes sense. And I'd be happy to take those questions as well via email to help the groups here understand that if you send me an email, which I can put in chat as well. And just as far as monitoring age and health goes, we're not asking the employer to do that. We're asking the employer to make their employees aware of how those factors can enhance their exposure to heat. So we don't want employers to go to their employees and say, how old are you? What medical symptoms do you have? No, we want the employer to tell their employees, hey, if you have medical issues, these can make heat illness more likely. If you are of an advanced age, this can make heat illness more likely as part of a training program. We do not want you to delve into HIPAA. We don't want you to delve into any of those more protected information matters. We just want you to teach your employees that this is a factor. And I hope that clarifies as far as that goes. As far as the concerns with the federal regulation, again, it's really important that we understand that the federal standard is going to take some time. If the federal regulation or the standard comes out and we have to review it, if we can show that this works for Nevada, we don't have to change our regulation. This regulation has been built by multiple stakeholder sessions. It's very performance based. It puts the burden on the employer to show us how they're protecting their workers. It's our belief and based on discussions that this is better than a very prescriptive standard, which has been something that many of our stakeholders have had issues with. Many of our stakeholders do not want prescribed shade requirements and water requirements. They want general, we're going to protect our people, and this is how. This regulation allows you to do that. And if we can show that it works, we do not have to adopt the federal standard. And I hope that generally answers the questions. But again, I'm open for ongoing discussion after this adoption hearing.
Mr. Chair, I'm seeing no other hands and nothing in the chat.
Thank you. Folks, we really appreciate your participation. Your ongoing comments have been very helpful. truly this regulation has been built by Nevadans. It's been something that's multiple stakeholder sessions. We've taken every public comment, and this regulation has been through a multitude of revisions to work with you, the employers and the employees of Nevada. I feel this regulation is much more useful for Nevadans than something more prescriptive, like in California, or like something the feds might implement as a standard. So I really feel like this regulation can work for us.
Hey, Mr. Gardner,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. This is Chris Freckles. I think that given that you had made some comments to address comments from interested parties here, you spoke on the employer, training the employees to teach the employees, if they have a health issue, for example, or one of the factors in Section 5 that they need to know how to handle that as a factor. The employee needs to know how to handle that, teaching employees how to handle their health, et cetera, as a factor. And that you spoke on the federal standard maybe taking some time. We don't know when it will come, but if we can have our own regulation show that it's effective, we would not have to necessarily adopt all the federal standard, and that it would be better. This regulation is kind of the product of working with industry, interested parties. It's not a prescriptive type of top-down regulation. Rather, it allows industry a lot of room to show that they're keeping their employees safe. I would recommend that, given that you made some comments towards the end there, that you just ask once more if there's any other public comment before you adjourn the meeting, so that we can just make sure that we have a ample opportunity for everybody. It looks like we got 39 participants or so on the call, just to make sure one last time that if anybody has a public comment, they could put it in the record, and appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. I'll open it up for another series of public comment.
Mr. Kruger, you may unmute your mic.
Yeah, thank you. A third bite of the apple. Mr. Chairman, a question on advising our clients as to implementation. When do these programs, especially it's for most medium to small employers, developing the kind of training program prescribed in Section 5 is a pretty onerous task. So what is the division's idea of when this would be, and when you'd be on the street with your thermometer checking temperature?
Mr. Kruger, thank you for your question. So Mr. Christopher Eccles can probably give you a better idea of timelines, but what I can tell you is following Mr. Eccles' response to the timelines, Nevada OSHA will be most likely providing a period of compliance discretion to allow employers to really know that this is implemented, and here's the time frame that we need to come into compliance. So, and that would be followed with a series of training from the safety consultation and training section as well. Mr. Eccles, could you please provide a rough timeline of how this plays out?
Well, as far as the timeline is concerned, we're trying to get this proposed regulation on the Legislative Commission's next agenda. They don't have an agenda posted yet, by which I could tell all the participants, hey, it's going on this agenda, and the members of the Legislative Commission are going to either pass it or not pass it. If they pass it, there's a few steps we have to take as an agency, sending it to the Secretary of State and filing it there, et cetera, in order for this to, become official and comply with all the requirements of 233B, the Nevada Administrative Procedures Act. But I think perhaps what Mr. Kruger was more interested in is, I think he referenced, when are Nevada OSHA, inspectors going to be out on the street, I think he said, looking to enforce the regulation once it becomes law. I guess, the answer is it's going to take at least, it sounds like, a few weeks for this to even become law, assuming the Legislative Commission passes it. And then I think what you were saying, Mr. Gardner, was there is going to be a period of Nevada OSHA and SCATS being responsive to further inquiries from interested parties and businesses, so that we're trying to get everybody into compliance. And there's going to be a period, like a transition period, if you will, where this would, assuming it becomes law, there would be a period where we would be receptive to taking comments, fielding questions, and helping industry understand what exactly is going to happen when the OSHA investigators are out on the street. But I mean, I think that there's going to be a period there where the agency is just trying to get people to understand and comply with this, and that it's hopefully, you know, implementation is not some kind of onerous task. Rather, this is, you know, a performance-based standard, and that Nevada OSHA is going to give the regulated industries time before just going out and kind of, you know, running around and issuing citations. I don't think that that's what the agency is looking to do. I think that there's going to be a period of transition here from the time that it becomes law, assuming it does, until the time that citations could be issued. The whole point is this is a collaborative effort with industry. That's why we've had subsequent, you know, meetings with industry to try and get the best possible feedback and all the possible feedback that we could take to incorporate that into this product here, this you know, reasonable, hopefully, regulation that is a result of a collaborative effort. I hope that kind of answers Mr. Kruger's questions. I mean, we're not going to be able to tell you how to advise your clients, but I think Mr. Gardner, who's the Chief Administrative Officer of OSHA, is saying there's going to be a period by which, you know, we're going to work with you and SCATS will work with you so that you can advise your clients accordingly before there are some kind of citations issued with respect to this reg if it becomes law. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Eccles.
Mr. Wadhams, you may unmute your mic.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that, Chair Gardner. Again, Jesse Wadhams with representing the Vegas Chamber. I apologize for coming back to this, but it was something, Chair, you mentioned with regard to particularly personal risk factors and how that is really not meant to get into essentially personal details or HIPAA or other items, you know, age, other potential classifications of employees that may be problematic for other reasons. But it's really, and maybe I'm misreading this, the Section 8 talks about the program needs to understand training about the effect of issues related to, in 8B, personal risk factors, which does include age and health. So I guess it sort of creates a bit of a, there's a bit of an ambiguity there. Are we supposed to start screening employees at an age and understanding their health conditions? Or is it simply about there may be an employee that may have an underlying health condition, you need to be on the alert for it? It just strikes me as maybe I'm misreading that. I just see a little bit of a oddity in how that language is set up.
Mr. Wadhams, I appreciate your comment, sir. Again, this regulation, again, with the way it's been designed, is that we want you to teach your employees about those factors. We do not want the employer to delve into those factors for each individual employee. We want the employees to understand that those factors are problematic for them when they're working in high heat conditions. We want the employees to understand that they're more at risk if they're of an advanced age or have underlying health issues. We want the program to address that you are covering that training and what the training entails. We want the program to address that. We want the training to address that. We don't want you to delve into each particular employee's concerns. We don't want you screening employees for those health issues. We want the employee to know and understand what that means for them. And I hope that answers your question.
Mr. Chair, I'm seeing no other hands raised and nothing in the chat.
Thank you. Mr. Eccles, do we have any other clarification needs?
No, sir. Thank you much.
Thank you. Everyone, we do appreciate your participation. If there is nothing further, we will close today's hearing. We appreciate your comments. They have been very helpful. Any additional written comment must be received by the division by 5 p.m. today, March 30th, 2022. You may submit your written comments to Christopher Eccles, Senior Division Counsel at ceccles@dir.nv.gov. One more time, that's ceccles@dir.nv.gov or 3360 West Sahara Avenue, Suite 250, Las Vegas, Nevada, 89102. Thank you for your help today, and the meeting is now adjourned.